In the previous chapter, we touched on the subject of articulation, and in this larger and in-depth chapter, we will explain this with a practical example that Achim has prepared for us. There are various options for switching between different articulations, and we will be looking at those now. But first, one thing to discuss is why do we need these articulation options? In this example, we will be using strings to demonstrate the options, which are, in other words, different playing techniques available to orchestral players. So here we have an empty arrangement with a selection of instruments that we have pre-selected. One of these instruments is the Vienna Instruments Pro 1 plugin, or VSL. This is the Pro version, which obviously has more options than the Lite version we were using previously. In our example, however, we will only be using the standard features, which are also available in the Lite version. From the matrix here on the right, we can load a setup, and as you can see, there are many options, but I will simply choose the chamber violins, which is a relatively small collection of violins. The first articulation option is staccato, and as we have seen previously, even if I hold the keys down, the note is a relatively short note, so a fast attack and a fast release with no real sustain. The next option is détaché, and I can select this with my mouse. This is longer than staccato, but it is still not a sustained sound. So it has a gentler attack, and then the sound remains for something like 1 second. Then we get the sustained articulation option. Here, the sound remains for as long as we hold the keys down, and this allows us to play in a legato fashion. This is obviously an important part of a violin section. Quite often, strings are sustained for a long time throughout a piece of music. The next option is the performance legato, and here we have the possibility for notes to glide up to other notes. The software actually has samples of these gliding movements, and this is a very expressive way of playing. In fact, what we are replicating is something like a violinist not jumping directly to a following note, but sliding their finger up the fingerboard of the instrument, so that the notes glide from one to another. We can compare this to portamento on, for example, a synthesizer. We activate the portamento by clicking on the button just below the P legato button. Almost all virtual libraries should have this option. By looking up here, we can see the instrument switching between the two choices. Next, we move on to the sforzato option. This has a strong attack, but the sustain part of the sound fades slightly and is relatively quiet. Now we come to the tremolo articulation, and this is achieved by the musician bowing rapidly backwards and forwards. And finally, the pizzicato option. This is the sound of the strings being plucked. A couple of questions spring to mind when seeing someone working with the articulation of options. And these are, first of all, there must be a better way to switch between articulations than simply using the mouse. Obviously, this works for simple passages, but it does take up one of your hands, and also, do we really need all these options? If my library simply has, for example, staccato and legato articulation options, can I still achieve reasonable results? If we look at the Vienna Instruments Pro library, it is a massive library with all sorts of options and features. But even in the basic version, you have the most important options available to you. But the point of this chapter is to show you what you will mainly need from your library, and this is available even in a library such as the VSL Instruments Lite version. What we would consider a necessity is that you have staccato and legato options. When discussing ways of switching between articulations, obviously using the mouse is not optimal, and in fact these switches are not recorded when using the mouse. However, if we look down here to the left of the keyboard, we have the key switches, and we will be discussing them in the following chapter.